Living in the Constant is rough. You have to deal with dog-sized spiders, direwolf-sized dogs, red demon guys eating all of your meatballs and leaving, and colossal horrors. But what about smell? Now, I'm not talking about that light bulb pig manure factory you have, because that's obviously gonna be pretty stinky. But I'm talking about the other survivors you have to share the Constant with, and yourself. Living in the Constant with others would almost certainly call for times of close contact. Close enough to be within smelling distance even. Today we are going to be diving deep into each character's lore and trying our best to deduce how all 26 of them smell. Why? For science, of course. Speaking of science, first we have our boy Wilson. Now, this one is going to be obvious. Wilson has a strange habit of putting food in his beard. This in its own would lower his smellability by a ton, but he even can store literal rotten food in his beard. And if you think this is bad, he can also store rotten eggs in his beard, which smell way worse. Now, I don't know if any of you have had the pleasure of smelling weeks-old garbage juice, but that's almost certainly the vibe I get from Wilson. As a Wilson main, it hurts to admit this, but yeah, our boy is certainly very stinky. Next up is Willow, and I mean, come on, this is another easy one. Willow is a pyromaniac who loves fire, loves being in fire, and generally loves anything fire. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, water is the opposite of fire, so there's no way Willow is bathing or taking a shower, right? Well, it's true Willow does have an aversion to water, but she seems to enjoy hot springs. So I mean, she probably keeps herself well maintained if the water in question is hot. Either way, there is no way Willow doesn't smell like a campfire 24/7, but honestly, that's not that bad compared to the others on this list. Next up is Wolfgang, the gym bro of the Constant. He eats a lot of food, works out a lot, and is generally on the front lines when fighting any potentially smelly monsters. And let's get this real, Wolfgang is an absolute pheromone maxer. He even states that he does not enjoy bath time. While Wolfgang would be an invaluable asset to any Constant faring crew, there is no way that nobody would complain about the inevitable smell this man would put off. And there is absolutely no way that he doesn't stink of pure BO. But at least it's better than the garbage juice beard that Wilson is sporting. Next up, we have Windy. Now, here's the problem with Windy. Many people would assume Windy is just straight up depressed, and this may be true. But remember, thanks to Abigail being connected to flowers, she is around a flower all day, every day. And she may not be that depressed, especially because she still does have access to her sister now that she is in the Constant. However, this is kind of hard to gauge, so I'm just gonna say she probably smells like flowers or something. Although being around her vibe might not be too pleasant, especially in a survival situation. Next up is WX78, and they are an automaton. Metal generally doesn't hold smell well and doesn't naturally smell like really anything. Of course, living in the Constant and being able to process rotten foods without worry are bound to add some bad smells to WX's aura. But it's all good because they can just wash it off, right? Oh yeah, they're an automaton. They can't really do anything water-based without risking absolute destruction. Overall though, I still feel like WX would have no offensive smells due to the fact that metal just can't retain smell very well. And when it comes to the whole eating rotten food stuff, well, sure, that would in theory make their breath stink, but robots don't really breathe, even when talking. So there's a good chance as long as you don't break WX open for any reason, they're just gonna smell like metal with maybe the slightest hint of ozone from all those circuits. Next up, Wickerbottom. Wickerbottom is well dressed, seemingly well groomed, and just overall seems like a very hygienic person. And after scrounging through all of her quotes, I couldn't find any evidence that she would stink or not stink. However, if we put our thinking caps on, Wickerbottom is around books and is crafting books 24/7. So reasonably, she probably smells like both old and fresh books. Most people would agree that that isn't an unpleasant smell, and is actually very unoffensive. Congratulations, Wickerbottom, you're very clean, I guess. Next up is Woodie. Now, Woodie is a lumberjack and a general enjoyer of the outdoors. These two things alone aren't great for determining smell. However, Woodie is also part beaver, moose, and goose, all of which are wild animals. But for the purpose of this video, we will just be trying to figure out what Woodie himself would potentially smell like. Dude, I can't keep a straight face. Hold on, I need a minute. Alright, anyways, Woodie dresses nice, seems to have a well-groomed beard, and chops trees. I personally don't see how Woodie would smell bad. And many wood types, like pine, actually have a pleasant aroma. So there's that. Yeah, I don't think he would be bad to be around at all. Maybe not his other halves, but again, that's not what we're talking about here. Next up is Wes. Now, Wes is a mime who also happens to be covered in a ton of makeup. Finally, my many years of working in Halloween stores can come into play here. Judging by the fact that this particular makeup is still on Wes's face despite all of the hardships the Constant puts him through, I'm gonna guess it's oil-based makeup, better known as grease makeup. Now, this is my opinion, but grease makeup on its own is rather stinky. It kind of smells like burnt crayons to me. I'm just not a fan of it. But it also would hold smells really well that wouldn't come off from washing, because it's oil-based, and meant to stay on even if it gets wet. This would probably make Wes stink of both the makeup and whatever other particles one would acquire in their stay in the Constant. To a mild degree, of course. Next up is Maxwell, and I mean, come on, this guy is canonically the most dapper character in the entire Don't Starve cast. Not only is he well-dressed and well-groomed, he also literally never has to get his hands dirty thanks to his shadow minions doing almost everything for him. If I had to guess, a man of Maxwell's stature and status would almost certainly smell of the most expensive cologne possible, and would probably be pleasant to be around if you're not one of the people he kidnapped, that is. Next up is the Valkyrie warrior Wigfrid. And whenever she's not on the front lines fighting all of the potentially very stinky monsters of the Constant, she's eating her strictly carnivore diet. Now, I'm sure there's some people out there who manage to live on a carnivore diet just fine. And if you are one of those people, I'm not saying you stink. But you see, there's something called meat sweats. And basically it means when you eat excessive protein, such as meat, you sweat a lot more. I have experienced this personally, and I can say it will make you unpleasantly stinky and moist. Combine that with Wigfrid's frontline status, yeah, she's gonna probably reek of BO and whatever monster guts she has on her at the time. Not very good. Next up is Weber, and many people may assume that I'm just gonna be boring here and say that he just smells like spiders, which do have a noticeable smell, funny enough. However, to judge Weber, we must judge his diet. Many Weber players will just straight up consume monster meat on a daily basis, most of the time raw as it is more effective. There is no way that's not gonna cause some particularly violent mouth odor. And if you have ever interacted with anybody within comfortable talking distance, mouth odors are generally what hit you first thanks to how talking works. So Weber would probably smell like whatever raw monster meat smells like, which I'm gonna assume is not good. Next up is Walani. And Walani is, like her bio says, a chill surfer gal. She doesn't want to do much and doesn't seem to care for much, just wants to be out on the ocean surfing waves. She seems very well put together, and if I had to guess, she probably smells like sea salt and sea air. It's boring and obvious, I know, but remember, when it comes to single-player exclusive characters, we don't have much backstory to go off of. Next up, Worley. And as the Constant's resident chef, there is absolutely no way this man doesn't smell heavenly. I mean, let's be real for a second, Worley's specialty dishes don't look half bad. He even somehow makes monster meat look really, really good. Worley 100% smells like a well-stocked kitchen pantry, like the good kind, with all of the spices and aromatics a chef could ever dream of. There's absolutely zero chance that he smells bad. I refuse to believe it. Next up, the Monkey King Wilbur. Now, Wilbur is the king of the prime apes, and as the king, he is able to also throw poop. I mean, if we put two and two together, Wilbur probably smells like poop. He also is the only character that produces poop out of every character in the entire Don't Starve-averse, for some reason, but that theory might be for another video. Next up is Woodlegs, and this guy is the opposite of well put together. Missing teeth, peg body parts, mangy beard. Yeah, he's certainly stinking alright. But of what? Well, if I had to make an educated guess, a mixture of sea breeze combined with scurvy-induced decaying teeth. Yikes. Not good. Next up, we have Wilba. Now, many of you would think, well, she's a pig, so there's no way she doesn't smell bad, right? Well, she's also royalty in a very capitalist society. I would say she has enough luxuries to be a non-smelly pig, and would probably smell of some sort of perfume, or whatever high society Hamlet pigs would wear. Next up, we have Wormwood. And here's the dilemma. On one hand, Wormwood is a plant. Plants generally smell good. Well, save for a few that purposely smell bad. But the problem is, Wormwood is constantly covering himself in poop. Like, not consuming it or anything, literally slathering himself in the poop. Wormwood would almost certainly smell like doo-doo whenever he is not bloomed. However, I'm sure he smells like doo-doo with a hint of floral essence when bloomed. Probably like a well-maintained public restroom sort of smell. Not great, but I mean, yeah. Next up is Wheeler, Hamlet's resident adventurer. She loves exploring and is the only character in the entire Constant who has learned the power of sliding. Unfortunately, the power of sliding is bound to make Wheeler a little dirty, and crawling through decrepit ruins all day must come at the toll of her absorbing whatever smells those ruins hold, which would mean she would probably smell rather dusty. Not bad, but I mean, yeah. Next up is Wagstaff. Now, Wagstaff is an actual scientist, producing many different devices and constantly tinkering. Wagstaff almost certainly prefers productivity over self-care. Wagstaff would certainly be a little stinky, but most of that stink would probably be ozone from all the electronics he works with, and maybe a hint of whatever lunar essence smells like since he, harvests that stuff. As a side note, what do you guys think the moon smells like? Now we are on to Winona. Winona is a factory worker who is very good at what she does, which is building things. However, she tends to overexert herself a lot and seems to care more about getting things done than taking care of herself. Winona would probably smell like a workshop with a strong hint of BO. Next is Walter. Now, Walter has nothing going on with him for me to believe he smells bad. He's pretty well put together, unlike some of the other residents of the Constant. I guess Walter would probably smell normal? That's just a fancy way of saying I have no way to figure out what the answer would be, to be honest. So, let's just move on. Wortox, the mischievous imp. Wortox is a literal animal. And if any of you have ever owned furry pets, such as most cats or dogs, you'll know that they can get very stinky very easily due to all that heavy fur. Not to mention, Wortox is out slaughtering everything he gets his eyes on to consume their souls, or use them to heal him and his friends. Wortox definitely would have a grimy, dirty smell to him if we go off that alone. But part of me thinks Wortox would do his best to stay clean. Even mischievous imps probably have some standards, right? Next is Wurt. And oh boy, in real life, I would not want Wurt anywhere near me. She hangs out in the swamp all day, carries fish everywhere she goes, and not to mention she is a fish. Wurt most likely smells like a pond, and I know that doesn't sound bad, but I'm talking about one of those natural ponds, the ones that have that gross, yucky, dirty smell when you walk by them. Not the civilized ponds. If you know, you know. Yeah, it's not good. Okay, I might sound different for this one, but it's because while editing I forgot to include Wanda. But to be honest, I feel like Wanda is in such a rush to do everything that hygiene isn't on her list of priorities. So, yeah, probably pretty stinky. Next up is Wonkey, and most people would assume Wonkey is the same as Wilbur. However, we have to factor that not only does Wonkey lack the ability to hold poop and produce poop, Wonkey is also a transformation of your character. So Wonkey would be a mixed bag because it really depends on what character you converted into Wonkey. Long-term Wonkeys, however, would probably end up having a wet dog smell. Because, being a monkey pirate is bound to cause some moisture to accumulate. And finally, Warbucks. Now, so many of you were upset that I left Warbucks out of my crime video, so he finally makes an appearance here. If you don't know who he is, he was the first and only fully developed character removed from the game entirely. Warbucks, being based off of a 1900s big game hunter, would probably smell of rich cologne. Why? Well, he loves money. And big game hunters back then were mostly rich, for some pretty bad reasons, of course. Now we need to ask ourselves who would smell the best out of all 26 characters. I'm gonna go with Maxwell. Of course, we're talking about the post-Shadow Throne Maxwell because the Nightmare Fuel tainted Maxwell almost certainly smells disgusting. But Maxwell is so dapper that it even keeps himself sane, something that no other survivor can say the same about. Not to mention, he never has to lay a finger on the Constant thanks to his shadow minions. Yeah, this man definitely doesn't smell bad at all. And what about the worst smelling character? This has got to go to Wurt. Now, sure, there's an honorable mention for Wormwood since he literally smothers himself in poop, but at least he has his bloom to potentially help cover some of the poop smell. Wurt has nothing. She would smell like the swamp, which in real life is basically nature's outhouse, and fish. There's nothing pleasant about that. Sure, she doesn't mind water and actually likes it, but have you ever washed a fish? No, because you can't. They're smelly no matter what. Ergo, Wurt takes the crown as the constant smelliest survivor, and Maxwell takes the crown as the cleanest survivor, or least smelly survivor. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you aren't already, and of course leave a comment telling me who you think would smell the best and worst down below, because obviously this list is highly speculative. Either way, this has been Polarlotus, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.